to evaluate peer support. Okay, thanks very much, Sue.
Thank you. I'm just waiting for the option to share my screen.
I think that's right. That should be okay now, Sue. I've stopped sharing.
Yes, I'll just see what comes up. Oh yeah, that's fine. Can you confirm that you can see that screen all right, Liz?
Yes, I can see that, Sue.
Lovely, thank you. So this afternoon, I'm going to be talking about an evaluation of 2 peer support schemes, which was carried out by a student researcher. So I'm from Student and Library Services at Teesside University, and although I'm presenting this on my own, I'd like to give special thanks to my colleague Yvonne, who's led the development of the schemes, and to Aaliyah, who was our student researcher. So the overview of the presentation, I'm going to start with some background about the 2 peer support schemes that I'll be discussing, then explain what the role of the student researcher was, give our findings with quite a few quotes, and then finally our conclusions and next steps for each of the schemes. So the first scheme is accommodation buddying. The background to this particular scheme was very much the COVID situation and the concern that students who remained in university accommodation in the first lockdown in March 2020 would feel very isolated. So they were offered buddies, and a handful of them took up that offer. So those buddies provided online contact, which starts with an email but could progress to phone or to Teams chats. And each volunteer buddy can support several students, but they contact each one individually. So within 2021, although we weren't in lockdown at the start of last academic year, we felt that there was still potential for students in university accommodation to feel isolated. So we offered a buddy to all those students. They were asked if they'd like to have a named contact to help them settle in, to refer them to services when needed, and to keep in regular touch with them. And this was promoted by direct email from the accommodation team. So these are the numbers involved. 93 students requested a buddy, and we trained 34 volunteer buddies, but not all students replied to those. Those who did asked about the practicalities of university life, especially managing accommodation, coping with COVID restrictions, and who to contact in different situations. So this was a new scheme, which was why we wanted to evaluate it. The second peer support scheme is PASS, which is an internationally recognised scheme, which began at Teesside a while ago in 2014. So with PASS, volunteer students are trained as PASS leaders to mentor and guide students in lower years to support their learning through study sessions. So PASS sessions are weekly and can take different formats, but the agenda is generally student-led, based, for example, on the module content for that week or an upcoming assessment. So PASS leaders use a variety of techniques to facilitate the group to talk about any areas that are unclear. And there are also other members of staff who support the scheme. So PASS supervisors who are members of staff from Student and Library Services and academic coordinators, and they arrange regular meetings. So within 2021, both training for PASS and the delivery was online because of COVID restrictions. So we wanted to evaluate this because the online delivery had been very different from our usual face-to-face sessions. We'd had fewer volunteers, so we weren't able to offer PASS in as many subject areas as previously, but even with that, engagement had been reduced. So you can see that the figures on the screen. There were fewer attendees and not as many attendees average within each session. So the benefits of a student researcher, I've explained why we wanted to evaluate both schemes because of those changes, but having a student researcher gave us more credibility because as a student herself, she knew what it was like for other students. She hadn't been involved with the peer support schemes herself, so we felt that students would be more open with her, For example, we asked questions about the training and how suitable that was. And we thought that students wouldn't want to be too critical with us if we'd asked those questions. Time was a big benefit. She had dedicated paid hours to give to this. We often talk about doing evaluation, but don't always manage to find the time in the diaries to do it. And we were also conscious that we were developing her skills and enhancing her employability. So we did actually present some findings together at our Learning and Teaching Conference at Teesside. So the methodology, there were questionnaires. Aaliyah designed the questionnaires initially after we'd got ethical clearance, and we then reviewed them. But she sent them out. Again, the interview schedule was agreed by Aaliyah, Yvonne and myself in advance, but then she made all the contacts and carried out the interviews. So I'm now going to present the findings for each of the 4 groups: the buddies, the buddied students, the PASS leaders, and the students who attended PASS. So beginning with the buddies, we wanted to know why they volunteered, because we thought that would be helpful for recruitment in future years. And the first quote indicates how useful it is to be able to offer students more opportunities than are available through their courses. So this interviewed student gave that reason. She was enjoying her course, but she felt that she needed to do more and to show possible employers that she had done more. I think it's also been helpful to be able to offer students low stakes volunteering opportunities. So because the buddies were just asked to email their students once a week, this gave buddies like the one quoted here in the second quote, who felt shy, a potential stepping stone to more challenging volunteering or employment. We asked the question of what skills or experiences they'd gained as part of their role. The buddies found that they'd learned lots of skills, especially in communication, but also patience, confidence, empathy, all the different skills that you can see listed on that slide: organisational skills, time management, etc. They did have challenges though. The main challenge was a lack of communication between themselves and some of the buddied students. Like this first quote, some students don't really respond to any communication, which was linked to what the buddy said in the second quote of not being sure how often to contact the students. They don't want to send out too many emails, but they're not feeling their time was well spent if students didn't respond. But the third quote is from a buddy who had the opposite challenge of students being too chatty and not knowing how to shorten those conversations without feeling rude. The buddies were concerned about the students that they were trying to support, and they didn't always feel that it was easy to tell how they were getting on by email, especially with the stress of COVID. So from the buddied students' perspective, they had asked for they wanted reassurance, a friendly face, someone who'd been there before and who knew how things worked at the university. And then some students recognised that they had particular challenges, either because they were international or because of COVID and the restrictions that meant that they couldn't see family as much as they would have wanted to. We asked them how approachable they felt their buddies were. And you can see that overall, they'd found the buddies very approachable. And then we asked them whether it had matched their expectations. Now, 81% said yes, but we've got a couple of quotes here from people who disagreed. The first quote is from a student who wasn't sure what to expect, so didn't know if the scheme had ended when contact stopped. And then another student who said that it wasn't what they'd expected because it was so much better. They were very thankful that they'd had that buddy there to support them. We asked them how the buddying scheme had affected their experiences, what difference had it made. For some students, it didn't make much difference, or it just helped with settling in. It was a bit of security, or made the students feel more at ease, safer in case something happened. But we were quite surprised to see some of these really positive quotes. So students felt that the scheme was exactly what they needed. It had helped to raise spirits, it saved the students from worries, and help the student to feel more at home. And a lot of this has been linked to a recognition that these weren't usual times, that the pandemic had made everything much more difficult. And then this quote, which I'll just read out because it, I think for me, really sums up what the buddy scheme has offered. I really appreciate the buddy scheme. It's helped me a lot where I would have just sat or struggled. Having an accommodation buddy has helped me not only mentally, but also with motivation, as sometimes a good chat is all you really need. It might seem quite basic just to have a student contact, but it can prevent situations from escalating and hopefully help with retention. And I really like this, like that last point, that sometimes it's just a good chat that you really need. So our conclusions from the buddying side of things: it was good to see the skills that the buddies had gained. Some of them were what we'd expected, but we hadn't thought that buddies would volunteer to overcome shyness or would need to develop skills in how to bring conversations to a close. It was good to see that value that the buddies had brought. We knew this already, but it was reinforced by the findings, which has made us keen to continue. I haven't mentioned it, but we also had positive feedback for our processes and our training, and that the buddies had felt supported. But there were a couple of areas where the research has led us to want to make some changes. So we need to manage the expectations of buddies, so that we know that now that we know that not all students will engage, and we'll fit this into our training. And we've also learned that we need to check in with our buddied students too. So the comment from the student whose buddy had stopped contacting them and they didn't know if that was to be expected. So we'd focused on supporting the buddies, and we hadn't thought so much about what the experience was like for the students. So next steps is to develop some guidance for buddied students. So they have something to tell them what to expect, how many times they'll be contacted, and we hope to expand beyond students in accommodation to direct entry students. But some of the drivers might be different this academic year. We can only hope that COVID won't have the same impact, but it might mean that there's less demand for the buddy scheme. So moving on to PASS then, first of all, looking at our PASS leaders. So why had they volunteered? So their motivation was wanting to be there for first years. So the empathy with them, remembering what it was like to be a first year student. There was a sense of giving back. So those of them who had had PASS themselves had found it useful, so wanted to help others. I mean, generally our PASS leaders are really lovely, lovely people. But they'd also volunteered to gain skills that would help them in a career, or perhaps they were slightly talked into it, like the last quote. We asked them how easy was it to fit PASS into student life, and there was a real mixed bag of attitudes. Some leaders found PASS easy, like the first quote, but others had struggled. But a lot of those issues had come from other areas of their lives. We are a widening participation university, and so our students often come with a lot of other issues as well, family that they have to manage. And as PASS leaders are so committed, they tend to be the students who are also taking on other roles. They might be student reps or ambassadors, that kind of thing. But students, there was a lot of satisfaction expressed with being a PASS leader, which was good to see. So leaders had found it rewarding, especially when it came to the point that students had achieved in their assignments. So it was often after the scheme had ended that they got the emails and students said the PASS had really helped them and they got that grade. So they didn't always realise how rewarding they'd found it until afterwards, when they recognised what a difference they'd made. So that's the positive, but not all PASS leaders were satisfied, which you can see in this graph. Those who'd given a low grade were asked why, and overwhelmingly they reported low attendance from students as the reason. So they were there willing to volunteer to help students, but students hadn't come to the online sessions, which meant they felt that their time wasn't well spent. So one of the main areas we wanted to find out about with PASS was what it was like to deliver sessions online. So there were some positives. This was related to the ease of delivering from home, not having to come on campus, but also the features of the technology, the skills learnt with that technology. Yeah, so some people really found that positive. But actually, the negatives overwhelmed the positives for many leaders. There was a recognition that it was more difficult to make friendships online. Some leaders couldn't find anything positive to say about being online, and they felt that it was the online sessions that had led to the lack of attendance, this Teams fatigue that is mentioned in the third quote. Having said that, some leaders managed to find a way through these online difficulties. This is quite a long quote, but it does demonstrate the process that everyone had to go through. So initially, people didn't want to put their microphones or cameras on, and it felt odd, it felt weird, it was quite nerve-wracking. But then as time went on, people got more confident, and then they kept their cameras and their mics on, and people became more comfortable. So it took more time. And the relationship was harder to build, but it didn't mean that we couldn't do it. So a recognition that for some leaders, they did get through those difficulties.
10 minutes left, Sue.
Thank you. So students who attended PASS then, why did they attend? So these reasons give a good summary of the benefits of PASS. So it's supplementary to course content, so it gives further understanding of topics. It's meeting up with students from a higher year. It's also a way to meet other students in your course, maybe feel less anxious. So it's offering something slightly different from traditional classes. And that was very much the kind of reasons we would expect students to say. We asked them if they'd found the leaders supportive. Overall, yes, though there were a few dissenting voices, just a few. And given that attendance had been poor, we asked what would have helped. And some of this related to timing, some to the difficulty of structuring sessions. If PASS isn't going well, if people aren't coming, then the leaders might not want to plan in case that time is wasted. The last comment, if participants were their age, is interesting. So we don't know why the student made that comment on the questionnaire, but it indicates that some students felt a lack of affinity with the other people who had attended PASS. So we asked the students what they'd liked about sessions being online. So as mentioned by the leaders, there was the lack of travel. It was interesting that some people found it more relaxed. But then we've got the last 2 points, the ability to mute other attendees and then being able to freely leave the session, which don't really demonstrate the community spirit that we were trying to develop within PASS. And then what did they not like about it? There were lots of negatives, some practicalities like IT issues or timing. Students had had a blended timetable in 2020-21. So if they'd been on campus, they had to find somewhere online to join, somewhere to join an online session, and that wasn't always easy. There were the difficulties also mentioned by the leaders of building relationships, and some topics, especially practical ones, were difficult to replicate online. But there was also a sense that being online hadn't encouraged more mature behaviour. So that last quote of some seeing other students were messing around more because they had computers to hide behind. So this is the quote that really sums up for me our findings from the PASS survey. The problems weren't so much with PASS. PASS itself is brilliant. It was just bad luck that COVID happened. And then the COVID situation that had led to the online sessions and some of the problems those brought. So what we got as conclusions from our PASS research? It was good to see, in spite of the challenges, students were supported to gain better grades, and that the PASS leaders had found that rewarding. But those circumstances weren't ideal. So reflecting back, it wasn't just IT issues, challenges related partly to lack of attendance, but also the difficulty of establishing a community and encouraging good behaviour. And I think because PASS wasn't what we knew it could be as PASS supervisors last year, it was easy for us to forget how much we actually managed to do in difficult circumstances. So it helped us to see the positives, which was why it was so good to have an outside person doing that research. So linked to that, for both schemes, we recognise the value of having that student researcher, and we're very lucky at Teesside that that opportunity is available to students. We gain far more insight than we would have been able to on our own. So next steps for PASS, as you might have guessed, we're going back face to face, but we've got some training being online as a backup in case we need it. We'll continue to use online resources instead of lots of printing out, which is what we used to do with our face-to-face PASS. And we'll keep our Teams site to continue to enable sharing. So within training, we'll be including something about encouraging attendance to help the leaders find the solution to those issues, so they're not so surprised if students don't attend, and to help them manage expectations. So that was all I wanted to say. I don't know if anybody's got any questions, and I'll stop sharing.
Thanks very much, Sue, for that really interesting talk. So as Sue said, if you have got any questions, if you just like to use the raised hand feature, and I can facilitate that. If we haven't got any questions, then we can move on to the next two speakers, because maybe these two next speakers are similar to Sue's talk. So perhaps by the end of the session, we can gather all the questions together. So thanks very much again, Sue. So I'll just like to introduce the next two speakers, who are Conor Start and Chris Awre, and they're from the University of Hull. And they're going to talk about reviewing and developing peer support at the University of Hull.
Okay, so I'm going to start, and then I will hand over to Conor in due course. We're also going to be talking about PASS, which is the form of peer support that we offer at the University of Hull. In our context, it was in the not so much related to the pandemic. It was in relation to wishing to take a fresh look at what it meant to deliver PASS across the university, and the desire to carry out some research in order to find out what we could learn from other universities across the country. So next slide, please. Thank you. So first of all, just for those of you who aren't necessarily familiar, and I realise that Sue's covered this to some extent about what PASS is. It's a collaborative learning model that was created initially in the 1970s in America, but it has been picked up quite widely across the world since then, and there is a European Centre for it in Sweden. And essentially it is about students, PASS leaders, who facilitate learning, do not teach themselves, although it's interesting that one example of one site we did come across had found that one of the issues that they'd encountered was PASS leaders being drawn into teaching to some extent. And then we also have PASS mentors, or sometimes called senior leaders, who support those leaders themselves. So it's like sort of tiered support mechanism. And the aim of PASS, as explained in a sense by Sue as well, but certainly from our point of view, is it's about helping students transition to university life, because it's helping them to get the input from students who have, in a sense, been there, done that, helps them to develop skills, and it helps to create communities within subject areas, and helps you to meet students encountering maybe similar problems with whom you can talk them through. Next slide. So the context, as I mentioned, is that we wanted to explore more broadly about the way in which we can make use of PASS across the university. Our PVC education had a very positive experience of PASS at a previous institution before she came to Hull, and it indicated a desire to see the availability of PASS right across the university. The history of it is such that we have been delivering PASS for over a decade, and delivering it successfully, and that's always been through the skills team within the university library. There has been cross-faculty engagement in PASS across those years, but there has been variable range of subject areas who have engaged, and it has always been very voluntary. So we would put out the service, we would advocate it, the benefits of it, But it was very much up to academic individuals and staff who would like to engage and use PASS within their subject areas and in their modules that led to it being introduced in those particular areas. And what we wanted to do was to try and find a way in which we could spread it out more broadly, and had this opportunity of getting this top-down level of support from our PVC. We had a well-established model to build from. We weren't starting from scratch. We wanted to also recognise and build on the idea that we have the PASS delivered through our study skills team, but the study skills team also covers information literacy support. And one of the advantages that we've found of having PASS led by that team has been that ability to sort of link up and join up what is brought up in PASS with what opportunities there are to gain support through the various different channels around study skills and information literacy in particular. Or indeed, if there are any other matters that came up in PASS sessions related to the library, then we were very well positioned to be able to support those. We're taking a fairly long-term view of this, so we're using 21-22 as a preparative year to the extent of using this to engage with faculties and discuss and work with them to understand how PASS can best work for them. And then we're looking to then roll out further delivery from next academic year, 2022-23, and onwards from there. So I'll pass to informing all of this was a whole bunch of research that Conor carried out for us earlier this year, and I'll hand over to him to describe that process and the findings that came from it.
Thank you very much, Chris. So in conducting this research, we started by creating a JISC online survey, and this consisted of 16 questions. And we got a decent response to this. We got 31 responses to this. And one of the last question on our survey was, were people willing to participate in a follow-up interview, just delving further into some of the questions so we can get a rounded response? And 11 people responded to this. And from this data, we got a mixture of qualitative and quantitative data, and we created a report from this, and we sent that report back to the JISC mailing lists. We sent it to 3 JISC mailing lists, and we sent the report to them. And just some of our key findings were, with PASS, a centralised scheme with dedicated staff tended to operate on a larger scale compared to those PASS schemes where they were operated in different departments. The main comment from everyone we spoke to was that academic engagement is critical to the success of PASS. With a top-down approach with PASS, it can help to encourage academic buy-in, but it can also create a potential barrier. And one of the main, most common areas to be funded for PASS was the Access and Participation Fund. And to get students into becoming PASS leaders, the most common incentive was to pay them. And I just thought it was worth highlighting that 3/4 of the people who answered our survey had at some point had challenges implementing PASS. Even the larger scale ones had at some point challenges with it. So I thought that was worth recognising. So with the staffing, as a PASS scheme grows and goes on a larger scale, the demand, especially for the administration of PASS, grows. If it's in multiple areas, having to run sessions, debriefs, training, recruitment, it becomes demanding on staff. So we found that the large-scale centralised schemes tended to have at least one member of staff that is full-time, or at least have multiple members of staff who are part-time. We did find one or two universities that had less than this, but this tended to be offset by a lot of the administration was in the departments rather than the PASS team itself. So Chris did mention earlier about PASS mentors and senior leaders. And its role is just to offer another level of support to PASS leaders from that student perspective rather than a staff or a lecturer perspective. And PASS mentors can be involved in the scheme in a number of ways. They can be involved in admin, in the getting in the recruitment, or shout outs, or helping the PASS team with admin. They also attend debriefs, and these debriefs, there'd be an academic member of staff, there'd be the PASS mentor, PASS leader, and someone from the PASS team, and they discuss any problems that the PASS leaders are going through, and it gives them a chance to speak to academic members of staff and also the past mentors and share advice and perspectives and offer another level of support. As similar to past leaders, past mentors can be paid or unpaid depending on the university's implementation of PASS, and also past mentors just lend itself to the idea of PASS itself, as it's collaborative learning, it's students helping other students. So as previously mentioned, the Access and Participation Fund was the most common, but we did find other universities used other funding sources such as the Library or Services funds and the Academic Department funds. With these funds, it did lend itself to an annual review to secure this funding, which allowed universities to have an annual review, go through their scheme, see their strengths and weaknesses, and create a plan if need be. The most commonly spent aspect of a budget was physical resources, and SI card and session planner app was used at one university, and this offset all these physical resources strain on the budget. It was on the Google Play Store, but it did mean that all students had to have access to this, so it does come with its problems. And we found that most universities offered academic awards, external ones, such as the Institute of Leadership and Management qualification. This helped for past leaders to evidence the skills that they've learned and just really stand out to employers on a CV. And also T-shirts, polo shirts and hoodies was also part of a budget, and this would be worn by the past leaders in sessions just to identify them. And we found that when it comes to training past leaders, we found out of the 10 of the 11 people in institutions we interviewed for, their leaders were trained by the past team themselves rather than the separate departments. This led to a consistent implementation of PASS across the institution. And we found that at least 5 of the 11 we interviewed conducted training in September when the students would come back, and this would either be in their first or second week. The one university that didn't train the past leaders, they created a VLE training module online so the students can go through it as they want in their own time and develop it in the different departments. And we also found one university that offered to past leaders accredited module, and in this they would evidence what they've done as past leaders, they would create portfolios, and it was another way to incentivize students to become past leaders. And also we found some institutions that held booster sessions or drop-in sessions, and this would be supported by library staff, so student services or information. They can learn new skills, or just if they're not feeling confident enough as past leaders, they can go through the training again. And also for the library staff, if they're helped with the training, it could be involved in their appraisal as well. So there's different approaches when implementing PASS. There's the top-down approach, and this can generate academic buy-in as it has institutional support, and it raises the awareness of PASS across a university. And what we found was, with a centralised scheme, PASS was most commonly ran out of the library. But there's also the bottom-up approach, which is student-driven, and students choose what they cover in their sessions, and this can be supported by library services. But this isn't to say there is either a top-down or a bottom-up approach, and that is it. There is a blend of the two. And the subject areas that PASS was in, we found over the past 5 years, there was an increase of 25% of those that we surveyed where PASS was involved in 10 or more subjects. And PASS tends to be focused at the module level on individual modules, but we saw a trend where 6 out of the 11 that we interviewed has changed recently from going from the module to the program level, where they'd still identify a core module, but it would be open up to the whole cohort. And some common subject areas were science and engineering, and also health sciences, and some difficult areas where some universities have had challenges implementing PASS were nursing, and some areas where there were binary answers like yes no answers in computing, where there was less scope for group discussion around theory. But the main aspect of PASS is it can be adapted. So there was never one subject area across everyone that we spoke to, that pass did fail in. There is ways and means around this. So at the University of Hull, nursing last year was one of our strongest subject areas. And this is because we adapted our course for when people are out on placement, we pull our pass leaders from our certificate program. So if we have first year students facilitating to first year students, but they've been already at the university for a year, therefore can be pass leaders. And when they're out on placement, they're used online to help go around those problems. And we found that 70% of those that we surveyed had pass timetabled, which was a potential barrier for most, as once pass grows to a large scale, that many sessions running across the full week, and you're having to find a suitable room for a pass session, which can become extremely difficult. And over the past year, the transition to online teaching has helped to offset some of this potential barrier, as people can meet up when they can set their own sessions and timetable them online rather than in the physical space. But also the most common comment we got with this transition to online sessions was there was a lack of engagement from students when compared to physical face-to-face sessions with online. And with the large-scale pass schemes, they had recognised time for pass in their timetabling session. And moving on to the academic staff and lecturer involvement, we found the most common time for lecturers to be involved was either weekly or monthly, and every single person we spoke to stressed how you needed to identify an academic member of staff to champion pass. If there was someone in a department that really was enthusiastic and really sold the scheme of its benefits to these for the students and for the academics as well, that was key to getting engagement across an institution. And we found that academics tended to lead the recruitment, and this was normally in lectures that give shout outs, and they might identify students that would lend themselves to be pass leaders as they work closely with the students compared to people in the pass teams. But with academic staff, the main barrier was workload. It was another pass was seen as another thing that was added to staff's workload, and it was really becoming a potential barrier. So one way with centralised scheme based in the library staff can use academic contacts to really offset a lot of this workload and help with a lot of the administration. So the administration time involved in pass, so they only really have to attend debriefs instead of doing everything else that the pass team could do.
Just 10 minutes left.
Thank you. And in conclusion, a centralised timetable scheme with a dedicated funding and staff allows for a large scalable pass scheme. Training conducted from a centralised pass team allows for consistency in its implementation across a university. And I can't stress it enough, academic engagement is vital to the success of pass. Pass can be adapted to suit any subject area, and it can also support university strategies. And also, library coordination has benefits through connection to related study support. And I will hand you back to Chris just to comment on the development of pass at the University of Hull from our research.
Okay, so thank you very much, Conor, for taking us through that. In taking those conclusions, we've been able to take those conclusions and use those as the basis for a business case to our own Access and Participation Fund, which it has been well supported. So we are moving ahead with that preparative year that I mentioned earlier on, in terms of engaging with our academic areas to discuss about how they can make use of PASS. We're taking that on the basis that there needs to be some fairly, in a sense, lines in the sand, so to speak, two of which primarily are that we need PASS to be timetabled. We recognise that the issues that were raised there by Conor, that in a sense, if we're a victim of our own success, then there's an issue with access to relevant spaces on campus to be able to run all the PASS sessions that may emerge. At the same time, it's one of the biggest burdens, I suppose, of making PASS work in the past has been trying to sort of find a space and a time in the timetable that can be used for such sessions. And if, as we would hope, PASS is seen as an integral part of the delivery of a programme, then if it is then part of the timetabling of that programme, it will help to both embed PASS within the programme and how it's delivered, and what students would see as being part of what they need to engage with. But it would also ensure that people have relevant time to be able to give to it going forward. We will, of course, be tackling and addressing the area of academic engagement, recognising the workload issue, which did come out of the survey that we did internally at the university, but also recognising that if we can position the engagement within the programme team looking at different programmes, then there is scope for there to be, again, looking at how PASS can be embedded within that programme in the most appropriate way suitable to that programme. We are very conscious that in taking out PASS with this top-down support, we did get one piece of feedback from one site that said that where it was in a sense overly pushed from a top-down perspective, that actually put people off. And as a result, they didn't get the buy-in that they would hope for. But generally speaking, having that top-down level support can be supportive because it encourages and indicates the relative importance of including PASS in how teaching is planned and how learning is developed. We're going to try and look at it from all subject areas, but we are equally open to the idea that if particular areas do explore PASS and look at how PASS might serve their needs and come to an informed conclusion that it's not relevant or not appropriate to their specific needs at this time, then that, yes, if that's an informed decision, then they can step away from it. But we would like everyone to engage with it, and that's where the top-down support will help us in doing so. And then certainly from our point of view of working in the library, we would wish to continue and develop how we benefit from the coordination within the library and the links that I mentioned we can make between PASS and the issues that come out of that, and how we can then most effectively support those through the various library services that we have. Okay, I think we can move on now, but I think the next slide is simply to say thank you very much, but happy to take any questions on what we have covered today.
Great, thanks so much, Conor and Chris, for that really interesting talk. Yeah, so if there are any questions for either Sue or for Conor and Chris, then just raise your hand, and we've got about 10 minutes left, give or take. So yeah, any questions, please? Well, that obviously means that your talks were really interesting, and they covered everything that we needed to know about PASS. So thanks again, you three, for those talks. So I just wanted to just mention we're nearly at the close of the conference, unbelievably, but do try and get along to Rosie's closing remarks, which will be about at 1:30, and that's where Rosie will announce the winners of the sponsor treasure hunt. So yeah, all that remains to say is thanks ever so much for coming, and I hope you found the conference really interesting and insightful. And if there's no more questions, then we'll wish you all goodbye. Okay, thanks very much.